Coming up, who are the most realistic draft targets for the Nets at 8th overall and which offer the most upside? I'll answer that after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And on today's show, I'm joined by an NBA draft analyst to break down the most likely prospects to be available at 8th overall and which offer the most star potential. And I'm joined now by Derek Parker, draft analyst on YouTube and writer for On SI. We are here to talk about the Nets' most realistic options with the number 8 pick and what direction they could go. And Derek, I think the consensus has been leading up to the draft that obviously Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, VJ Edgecombe, there might be some, disagreements about 3-4, what could go on. But I think it's pretty safe to say people expect those 4 guys to be off the board by the time the Nets pick. And the consensus on the next 3 prospects seems to be Trey Johnson, Kaman Maluak, and Jeremiah Fears in some order. Curious, you've gone through mock drafts. You have your own board, obviously. Of those 3 guys, who do you feel is the most realistic that could fall to the Nets at 8?
I think there's a lot of different options. I think, like you said, Ace Bailey and VJ Edgecombe feel like the 3rd and 4th best prospects in this draft right now. I don't know necessarily that I see that being Philadelphia and Charlotte picking there, but I think those guys will go at 3 and 4. So any trade ups will be for Ace Bailey or VJ Edgecombe. And like you said, Maluak, Trey Johnson, Jeremiah Fears seem to be the next little group. Out of those guys, it seems like Fears has hot stock right now, man. Like, especially with the report that some franchises potentially like him as much as Dylan Harper, which I think if they had number 2, they probably wouldn't feel that way. But I get the line of thinking. Maluak obviously is the next in line of these lengthy 7-footers that are going to be able to immediately hit the ground running in the NBA via his 7'2" height. And he's just massive. It's unteachable length. He's got some skill defending on the perimeter. And then Trey Johnson, one of my favorite players in this class, just an absolute sniper from beyond the arc, shot something like 40% on nearly, I think, 8 3-point attempts. He can score at all 3 levels. He's got better passing ability than people think. Out of the 3, to me, it feels like Maluak would be the most likely to fall, just simply because the other 2 are so high upside. I mean, you're getting a potential perennial all-star if you can develop them correctly. And while Maluak can add some decent impact overall, he's obviously not going to have like perennial all-star upside. So of those 3, I would bet Maluak to fall.
And we'll get more into who the realistic options after those 3 are and who we think would be the best pick for the Nets at 8. But if Maluak were to fall, is he a guy you feel should be atop the Nets board at 8 compared to some of the, other prospects that we'll get into that could be available after that?
I lean high upside for the Nets at 8 specifically, just because they've got these 3 other firsts that they could maybe go get a projectable starting center with. So while I think Maluak is a good player and could certainly be up near the top of the Nets board, I don't know that I'd have him at the top for number 8 specifically. Again, just because when's the next time Brooklyn's going to be in this position outside of the next few years? Especially if they go and, as has been reported, go grab a star maybe in a few years. They're not going to have these top 5 picks often, these top 10, whatever. So I would gamble a little higher than Maluak, but again, he would be a good piece that could hit the ground running pretty early.
All right, so let's get into some of the next, more realistic options for the Nets at 8. And, you said it for me, but I think the consensus, in my opinion, is that the Nets should be targeting a prospect with, some ceiling or upside, with their first pick, being a team that hasn't picked in the lottery since 2010, a fan base that's just starving for a homegrown star. And while it might not be likely they get a star with the 8th pick, you want to pick a guy who would at least have the, ability to pop in that regard. The guys that I see who have that upside, who could be a little bit of a swing, the names that I've come around at this 8th pick: Noah Esenge, Kon Knipple, Kasparis Yakachonis, Yegor Demon, Derek Queen. Those are kind of the options I see beyond the guys we already named who are likely to be off the board as the upside swings. Before we get into which of those, is there anybody I'm missing there who you would put in that group?
I don't think so. Honestly, you nailed it. Noah Asenge is not one that people group in with that kind of star upside a lot. So I think you including him was big, and then obviously Yegor Demon too. Just given the season he had, people might not think he's bound for stardom, but no, I think that was a really good group.
Yeah, and you see a lot of, common denominators amongst this group, a lot of ball handling, a lot of shot creation, a lot of those things. So of those guys that we named, realistic options who could be the upside swings at 8, who would you have atop that group as the number one guy that you would be looking at if you're the Nets?
So the top player on my personal board would be Kon Knipple, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I think he has the highest upside of that group. I think Yakuchonis would be up there in terms of upside. And the fun thing about Yakuchonis is even if he doesn't become this ball handling, table setting guard that shot makes at a high level that makes him an all-star, he's still got a wing frame. He's going to project to shoot the 3 ball. So even if the Nets gambled on Yakuchonis and he didn't turn into a 5-time all-star that can score 20 points a night and table set for the rest of his team, he could still be a really fun wing play. So I think that's certainly an option. Knipple, like I mentioned, is really good. I think he potentially at his highest possible outcome could have some all-star potential, but probably more of a projectable role player, maybe a super role player in that regard. And then Asenge is probably the other one here at number 8 out of the group that you mentioned that I would consider. Again, another player who, even if he doesn't hit that highest outcome, he's still forward sized, plays like a wing. He's got the length of a center. He's going to be able to do role player things well in the NBA in terms of getting out in transition. His free throw rate is one of the best we've ever seen, a great projectable indicator of future success. He can rebound. He's got some feel, some touch. He's very unselfish with the basketball, which you don't often see of those lengthy project wings. So that would probably be the trio out of the guys you mentioned that I would consider at 8. But of course, those other names, Derek Queen, Yegor Demon, they're not off the table.
So let's go through some of these guys individually. And I think you hit on a lot of stuff there, but I'd like to get a little bit more into detail. I've talked about Asenge on several pods. He's been a hot name that's been moving up the board amongst Nets fans. So we'll get deeper into him and get your takes. But I want to talk about Yakuchonis because he's been a guy who, at least I've seen some Nets fans kind of say, if the Nets picked him, that they would rescind their fandom. I thought, and he's kind of, they seem scared of that, but it's kind of interesting because I've seen the projections on him all over the place. I've seen some of the work that you've done. You seem to be higher on him than consensus. Mm-hmm. So what about Yakuchonis's game do you think could lend itself to potential NBA stardom or even a safer floor prospect like you alluded to before?
Yeah, honestly, covering these finals, obviously, like I said, I'm here in Indy covering the finals. It's kind of piqued that little part of my brain where you're watching the Pacers and the Thunder. There's not a low IQ basketball player on the floor. It's impossible to play one in the NBA finals. I mean, the basketball is so high level. Both of these teams are playing a chess match. There's so little room for error. And when you think of players like that, one of the ones to me that jumps out in this class is Yakuchonis. He is a guy who doesn't thrive with athleticism, but has that smooth, coordinated, high IQ game. He thrives with skill. He gets into his shots. He can make the right play. Now, are there things to shore up? Is he a developmental prospect? Of course. He's got to clean up the turnovers. He's got to get more efficient at all 3 levels. But if he can do that, he seems to me like a player who you could group in with those high IQ, skill-driven players pretty easily.
I think a lot of the trepidation surrounding Yakuchonis is people see, these ball handlers, these type of guys who are pretty grounded. There's limited athleticism, obviously, and some of the shooting concerns, obviously, I think, I've reared their heads throughout the season. Let's start on the athleticism, just in terms of him being a lead ball handler, him being a guy who, potentially needs to create separation against NBA defenders. Why does that, or does that, give you pause in how you evaluate him?
I don't have a ton of pause on him specifically just because his burst is a little better than people think. He might not have the twitchiest game in terms of side-to-side movement, but he can get downhill pretty quickly, honestly, with the ball in hand. And another thing, I mean, the NBA is so ball screen heavy, as we know, that even if he tries a few times and it is stifled at the point of attack, you can get him a ball screen. Nick Claxton can come over and set a pretty gnarly screen. So I'm just not worried about his ball handling too much in general. The athleticism that I would worry more about is maybe when you attack the ring, actually being in the paint, not being able to rise up as high as other guys, getting shots blocked, or just being a less efficient rim finisher in general. But even there, he's so savvy. He can pump fake. He can keep that pivot foot down. So he's just a player that I expect to figure things out, most simply.
And do you see the shooting with him as a big swing skill? Because it seems like, there's a lot of these ball handlers in the draft who, him, Demon, some of these other guys that didn't shoot it too well at the college level. And, their ability to potentially pull up, make some defenders work over the top of some screens, that could be a swing skill. Do you see that as the case for him?
Well, I do see it as a swing skill. I don't think it's the swing skill with him.
Okay.
I actually worry about his shooting less than most, I think. I'm more worried about the turnovers. The passing, when you really, really dive into the film, isn't as high level as like the box score says. Yeah, in terms of his three-point shooting, I'm not too worried about it. I think the motion's fluid. He had an early, I believe it was forearm injury where his numbers kind of fell off a cliff. So I'm not worried about the shooting. If anything, I'd be a little bit more worried about his passing. It's not as high level when you really dive into the tape as it seems on paper. So I'd be more worried about shoring up those turnovers opposed to actually nailing triples, which I think he'll be able to do at a pretty high level, especially playing with NBA gravity off other NBA stars.
Yeah, and on that note, a lot of people, I think, seem to feel that, he's not going to be a plus defender or anything along those lines, but the size, the shooting, some of the ancillary playmaking and some of that stuff could lend him to having some positional versatility, which I think, could obviously raise his floor at the next level. Do you see him as a guy who I think a lot of people thought, think he's going to be a ball handler, this ball dominant guy, but a guy who could potentially be more than that?
Yeah, 100%. You hit the nail on the head. While he doesn't have the defensive prowess as some of these other guys, he's still 6'5". I mean, pretty sturdy frame. The lateral mobility isn't great, but it's not bad either. So I don't expect him to be a player that's going to be picked on necessarily at the NBA level. I don't want to say he'll be hideable because that sounds like it has a negative connotation, but I think he'll be a wash defender in the NBA.
Coming back from the break, we're going to talk about Kon Knueppel, some of the Nets fans' favorite draft target to speak about, Noah Essenge, and potentially some other guys that they could target with the 8th pick. But before that, want to tell you about our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Look, guys, it's the summer. Maybe you're going out to eat more. You're hitting a sporting event, going to a concert. All that starts to add up. Monarch Money helps you track your spending and meet your financial goals. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Coming out of the break, talking with Derek Parker about the most realistic draft targets that the Nets could look to go after at 8. And, of those guys, we're talking about upside swings. We just hit on Yakachonis. Noah Essenge was a guy that you said you would be high on in this option. And Essenge, guy I've spoken about at length, a guy I think who's interesting because the draft range seems to be huge among pundits. I've seen some people who have him as low as 23 or so on mock drafts and big boards. Some people have him as high as 8 or something along those lines. So what do you see with him? And is he a skill set and an archetype that you feel like is worth a gamble at number 8?
Yeah, I think I'm going to end up a little higher than the consensus on Essenge. I think people having him in the 20s is just not necessarily realistic, given, like I touched on, I think he'll be able to project to do role player things, but he's also 18 and a half. He's so far from being a finished product that I think there's a little more stardom infused in his skill set than people think, in terms of he's so long, he can get downhill, but he's also got options in passing it out, going up strong, getting to the line. His passing, very, very solid in the open floor. He's unselfish, which again, you just don't see of this archetype very much. We've seen these long French wings, Ousmane Dieng, Bilal Koulibaly, Tijan Salon last year. There's just not a lot of leeway to their skill sets, especially with Salon, as we've seen with Charlotte. Like, there's just not a lot of give and go outside of like him being huge and doing like role player out in transition things. So I think Asenge's got more give to his game, which is always good. And then, like I said, he's got so far to go. There's absolutely something to producing as an 18-year-old in a really great pro league in Ratio Farm Ulm and the Bundesliga. So I think he's got some funk to his game, man. I like him.
Yeah, I've hammered it home, the youth. He's a guy who was 17 years old when he started the season over there with and is, I think, second youngest player in the draft, 3 days older than Cooper Flagg. When you're able to produce, do the things that he's done at that level, while, there might not be an elite skill to point to in terms of ball handling, shooting, or even the defense has some work to go. I just think there's a lot to work with there. And let's get more into Knippel, because Knippel's been an interesting prospect to evaluate over the last year, because I've talked about it, but entering the season, the Nets fan base's hopes were obviously Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper, and Knippel kind of became this figure of like their worst fears of falling to the 8th pick of what happened, and the idea of ending up with Knippel. And if you floated the idea of Knippel as a player fans should be watching, they'd be like, blasphemous, like don't float that name in our ether. But he's a really good player, and I think that there is a lot to like. And there's a lot of draft analysts, plugged in people who, know what they're talking about, who say that he could go as high as like 4. They could see him, being a person that could go up there. So what do you see from him? And you touched on it briefly before, but is the ceiling with Knippel something that you feel like fans could really get excited about? Or is he going to be limited to, even if good, just the role player type status?
Yeah, I'll preface this with the fact that Knippel is 100% one of my favorite players in this draft. I will probably finish with him as I would say probably 4th or 5th best prospect. Not from like a ceiling perspective, but just overall, just evaluating his game. Any Nets fans that are hesitant about Knippel, I would urge them to go watch. I think it was the last few games of the ACC tournament and then the first few games of the NCAA tournament. He was a guy who, when Cooper Flagg was either completely out of the game or struggling with injury a little bit, completely took over. I mean, at 6'5", he's got this bulky, big body. He's an obvious shooter, one of the best in this class, just clean, projectable stroke, no qualms there. And then he's got this funky on-ball game in terms of handling that is not necessarily flashy or over the top in like a Jeremiah Fears or like Kyrie Irving type of way, but he gets where he wants to go. He uses that frame to get downhill and finish very efficiently. One of the best rim finishers in this class outside of Dylan Harper. And then he's got this stuff in the pick and roll with Kaman Malawach, who was a great rim runner, but still he's got some pick and roll prowess. He can handle the ball. That's what you want in a wing, to me. I mean, you want a guy who can hit threes playing off others, but can also handle the ball in moderation. I think teams players individually shot like 37% when he was guarding them. So he's scrappy defensively. He's just an incredibly well-rounded, high IQ, high feel player. And again, to my point of watching this finals, he would be a player that so seamlessly fits what people want to do, just in terms of throwing out lineups that don't have holes in them and can play the right way. He 100% fits that mold. And with the ceiling, it's higher than people think. It might not be as high as, say, obviously, Dylan Harper or like the high-end outcome of an Edgecombe, of a Jeremiah Fears, but there's also probably a better chance he hits that. And there's a better chance that it's higher than people think too.
And that's like something I wanted to talk on, because I think the conversation, and I understand why with the Nets, is ceiling. They have to swing on ceiling, but sometimes you can go for ceiling and the floor could fall out. So, there's a give and take, and there's a combination of, you go for ceiling, but you also want someone with some floor. And it seems like Knippel is one of the higher floor prospects that's going to fall in the lottery. So when you're talking about the Nets and you're talking about betting on his skill set, like, how do you feel the Nets at this spot should be prioritizing that ceiling versus floor proposition?
It's really tough because there's so much nuance to these players. Like, if you do get to 8 and you've got 2 or 3 of these options we've talked about, it really at that point comes down to, what do you want to add to the organizational process? Like, do they value length and size and athleticism more in Noah Asenge, or do you value this high floor, high feel guy in Knippel? Obviously, if I had the answer, I'd be working in a front office somewhere, but it's a decision that could make or break this year's top 10 draft pick for the Nets.
Yeah, definitely. And we're going to go to another break. And when we come back, we'll touch on a few of the last remaining prospects that could be available for the Nets with this 8th pick and potentially some late round gems that they could look to target. Before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Look, guys, maybe you're watching a Nets game and Cam Thomas is heating up while Nick Claxton's blocking shots. With FanDuel, you can combine live prop bets as the action unfolds. You've got a read on who's heating up. Why not back it up with a same-game parlay? New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Coming back from the break, talking with Derek Parker, breaking down the Nets draft options coming up with the selections on June 25th. And we touched on the most realistic guys for the Nets to be available. We hit on Noah Asenge, Kon Knipple, Kasparas Yakachonis. The two guys that are left that we haven't touched on are Yegor Demon and Derek Queen, two players who I feel like are pretty fascinating. And even if the Nets don't go after them at 8, there's talk about the Nets potentially trading up for another lottery pick. So they're guys that could be interesting still to fans. Let's start with Queen, because he's a guy who, I find is one of the most interesting players in the draft coming into the season. People are midway through the season. Some people saying potentially, top 10 pick. The combine didn't do him any favors, but still a guy who's ultra talented. What do you see from him as, a player who could potentially pop for a team who takes a chance on him?
Yeah, I always want to preface any Queen talk with the fact that he is one of the most fun players in this class. Like, regardless of what his actual outcome is, like as an impactful, positive basketball player, he's going to be fun, whether good or bad. Like, it's going to be a fun time. I'm not as personally high on Derek Queen as the consensus, just because this archetype being like a big skilled forward, but that can't protect the rim necessarily or shoot the ball from beyond the arc. These guys have had trouble succeeding in the modern NBA. I think even the high-end options, such as like a Sabonis or a Şengün, it's just tougher to see impact unless you have a floor-stretching, rim-protecting 5 next to them. And the Nets have half of that, but they don't have all of that. So there would be some work.
Those guys don't grow on trees. They're pretty tough to find. So
yeah, I mean, there's what, 3-4 in the entire league that are like really impactful, and then those guys' shelf lives aren't even very long either. So Queen to me is a super fun prospect. There's a potential where he could develop a 3-point shot and maybe get a little handsier on defense. But to me, he's just a little bit coming with a flawed package, and that's fine.
When you look at the skill set with him, I think that the shooting obviously will be big. The playmaking really intrigues me because there's few players that you see at his size, whatever he measures in at 6'10", who have the fluid driving ability that he has. Some of the crossover moves, some of the ways that he can get downhill, the way he can stop on a dime and pivot, it's really rare stuff. Like, you don't see it a lot. And I think that lends itself to what you were talking about him being one of the most fun players in the draft. Seeing a guy who's that big and that graceful and able to do those things is always fun to watch. But I think the passing could be a really big skill for him. I think a lot of people look at the assist to turnover rate and it gives them a little pause because he is such a gifted passer, but the assist to turnover numbers weren't great. Where do you fall on his playmaking ability? And as a guy who could, potentially, make some other guys better on his team.
He's a guy who, while the turnovers can be a little bit of a problem, firstly, I would expect those to be short up long-term, but he's a guy who at 6'10", 6'11-ish has every single pass in his bag, which is not often of these bigger center-esque guys. Very much in line with like Alperen Şengün in that way, or Sabonis. He can absolutely pass the ball. It is one of the more graceful big men I've seen in terms of dishing out, facilitating. He can do DHOs from the high post. He's hub-esque. He can get out in transition. He has everything in his arsenal, and eventually that's going to make his downhill scoring game even better, because when he's got optionality, maybe getting it to others, that's going to take scoring pressure off himself, off of others. So he's a fun player that he could have an immensely high ceiling and is hiding here in plain sight, but there's obviously these flaws we've talked about too.
Yeah, and the archetype is kind of tough because I feel the same way about it. Like there are these certain archetypes that I think give some front offices pause.
Mhm.
I've talked about Jeremiah Fears extensively, and that smaller lead guard who has the shooting questions, like and the defensive questions, like that's an archetype. I cover Cam Thomas, another archetype that gives a lot of people pause, and this one also because even if it hits the high range outcomes, like look at how Sabonis is hit, and there's a lot of
Right.
people that you'll talk to within NBA circles who are like, that's not a guy you want as, one of the top two highest paid players on your team. And it's hard to build a championship roster around those guys. Now, I think in the Nets case, I don't know if beggars can be choosers. They would take any star at this point that you could get. But I think the defensive concerns, the size, some of that, do you envision Queen as more of a 4 than a 5 in the NBA long term? Or he'll obviously have utility either way, but like where would you lean towards him ending up?
Yeah, you touched on it there. I think he'll be able to do both. To me, again, I think he would absolutely be best served as a 4. If you can get a player that stretches the floor behind him and protects the rim, I think that's ideal. If not, he'll still be able to function as a power forward. I would expect him to quicken up a little bit, maybe guard on the perimeter a little bit more than he did at Maryland. But in the long term, I think you have to play him at the 4 if you want to see like really, really high success.
And rounding this out, last guy I want to touch on is Yegor Demon. Of the guys who could be the upside swings, of the realistic prospects that could be available at 8. Demon's a guy, I spoke with him at the Combine. He met with the Nets at the Combine. From things I've heard, other NBA people, just interview-wise, came away really impressed with him. And he
Mhm.
shot it really well during his pro day. And shooting is a big question, however much stock you want to put into uncontested pro day jumpers. But he's an interesting player, interesting skill set, a guy who is the ball handler, who has some of the things and some of the skills that could lead you to believe he could pop. What do you see from him?
Yeah, he's another player just immensely fun to watch at 6'9". We throw around jumbo guard a lot, especially in the draft hemisphere. Oh, he's a big guard, jumbo guard. Yegor Dimon is like it. He is 100% a guard. He plays with the ball in his hand. He's the best passer in this class. I've evaluated a lot of the major guys at this point and even dipped into the second round quite a bit. He's the best passer in this class, to me, by a wide margin. He's got absolutely everything, 5.5 assists per game for BYU. He's got that advantage creation in terms of being 6'9", so he can see over people. He's got velocity on his passes. He's got zip. He's got accuracy. It's just an innate feel. It's unteachable. Whereas with guys like Queen, I think you'll be able to teach him how to do more things. That's not the case with Yegor. Like he knows how to do everything. At that point, it's just getting him comfortable with doing NBA things and playing in NBA systems. So he's got that in his bag. Best passer in the class. Scoring game wasn't perfect, wasn't efficient at all 3 levels, but the bones are there again with him being 6'9", being able to handle the ball. So he's got a fun, funky game. And again, like you said, one of the higher upside players in this class.
Yeah, I think some people they're different prospects, but him and Yakachonis, both, European guys who came in and are ball handlers who have good passing ability, and people kind of see them in a similar ilk. You said about Yakachonis that you see shooting as a swing skill, but not the swing skill. For Demon, do you think shooting is the swing skill for him?
100%. Yeah. His entire offensive game, it will likely hinge on it, because if he's not able to shoot, there's no way he's going to be able to get downhill. He doesn't have the athleticism. He's probably, from like a north-south perspective, much less athletic than Yakuchonis, where Yakuchonis can shoot. He'll have the pressure of shooting, but he'll also be able to get downhill without that. Demon's going to need to have that threat of a 3 ball to really get downhill, because he's just not fast enough laterally or, like I said, north-south. So shooting is going to be the swing skill. Now, again, pretty fluid motion. It's good. It didn't necessarily go down at a great rate with the Cougars, but I think he'll be able to do it off ball, certainly. Now, is he ever going to be a player who's handling the ball and steps back for 3 and nails a couple of those a game? Probably not. But to me, he at least projects to get quite a bit better at that. And like you said, taking stock in the open gym, open 3-pointers, but it looks good.
All right. Thank you, Derek. That was amazing. I think Nets fans will really appreciate it. Tell everyone where they can find your work.
Yes, we do writing NBA draft on SI, and then my YouTube channel, Derek, DEREK -Parker. You can find my scouting reports over there, mocks, as you touched on. So yeah, that's where it's at.
Definitely appreciate it. And maybe we'll circle around closer to the draft and have some more talk about this stuff.
100%.
That does it for this episode of Locked On Nets. Hope you guys really enjoyed the talk with Derek. Think he offered some great insights and he does a great job. So go check out his stuff on YouTube. But appreciate all of you for tuning in and supporting the show. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts or Spotify. But I'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.